Hey guys, tonight we descend into something a little different. Picture this: the cobbled streets of Paris, slick with mist and echoing with the uneven tap of shoes too nice to be wandering at midnight. You see the figure of a man in a fine wool coat tailored to perfection, his gloved hand gripping a fountain pen instead of a blade. But what he's looking for isn't a cafe or a friend. It's something or someone far more unsettling. There's a strange chill in the air that night, the kind that seems to seep under your collar and whisper that something's just not right. Street lamps cast pools of golden light between long shadows, and every alley seems to lean inward, listening. You will probably question your surroundings after this, especially when you realize that inspiration, at least for one gentleman, poet, came not from love nor heartbreak, but from the eerie stillness of a cooling body. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world we're falling asleep together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Paris. The year is 1902, the kind of Paris that artists romanticize and historians sanitize, where steam coils from manholes, horses clatter past gas lamps, and newspapers still use the word ghastly without irony. But tonight isn't about painters or revolutionaries. It's about a man who kills strangers to write better poems. You follow him from a distance. Not too close, he doesn't like company. His name is Roland Mouret. He is 28, although he tells people he's 31. There's something about 31 that feels more published, more melancholic, more lived in. His hair is always parted too precisely, and he speaks like he's halfway through a sonnet. He dresses like his mirror is Oscar Wilde, and he walks like he's on a mission. It's a Thursday, which doesn't mean much to Roland. He believes time is just a construct to distract lesser minds. He's already had his espresso, scribbled a line or two in his worn notebook, and wandered through the Latin Quarter, criticizing the sunlight. But now he wants something raw, something real. He slips through narrow passages in the 6th arrondissement, past shuttered bookstores and still singing drunkards. You pause at a flickering lamppost. Something about the way Roland looks at the world, like he's gently pulling the curtain between life and death. With one finger, is both mesmerizing and horrifying. A woman walks past him. He doesn't look up. She's too composed, too narrative. Roland is searching for something with jagged edges, something discordant, and then he sees it. A man, no, a boy really leaning against a brick wall near Rue de la Harpe. Shoes scuffed, eyes glazed, maybe asleep, maybe not. Either way, no one will miss him quickly. Roland steps closer, adjusting his cufflinks with delicate precision. He tilts his head like he's admiring a sculpture. You feel your breath catch, because there's something in the air now. Not the usual chill, not even danger. It's anticipation. Roland's hand slides into his coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for a pen. Yes, a pen. He carries it like a surgeon handles a scalpel. And from the other pocket, a folded scrap of parchment. He whispers something, barely audible, before tucking the note into the boy's coat. You blink. Roland hasn't harmed him. Not yet. But the look in his eyes, that soft, cold gaze that treats people like stanzas waiting to happen, that's the real knife. He walks away as if nothing happened, but he's already humming to himself, a tune that sounds suspiciously like a Baudelaire verse. By the time you gather the nerve to approach the boy, he's slumped deeper, breathing barely, and the note. It reads, "I touched a flame so none would freeze, and sang to death beneath the trees. My name you'll never need to know, just watch the blood upon the snow." There is no snow, but the metaphor lands, doesn't it? You're not the only one watching. A man in a battered brown coat leans on a lamppost across the street, staring at Roland's retreating figure. He doesn't look like a poet. more like someone who spent his life hearing stories rather than telling them. Inspector Lucien Gardet, a man with no love for riddles but a terrible weakness for justice. He reads the note and frowns. Not the kind of frown that says, "Who would write this?" but the kind that whispers, "I've seen this before," because he has. This isn't the first poem, and if Roland has anything to say about it, it won't be the last. The boy survives, barely, but that detail doesn't matter to Roland. What matters is the line, the flow, the moment of contact between a life nearly lost and a poem fully born. Roland files it away under divine spark. You follow him through the winding streets, into his tiny rented room above a shuttered hat shop. Inside, it smells like ink and wine and winter. His walls are papered with lines, clippings, rejected drafts, and phrases like "beauty requires consequence" and "pain is the only honest rhyme." He lights a cigarette with trembling fingers, not from guilt, from excitement. And then, with deliberate care, he writes the final stanza. It comes to him as easily as breath. A stranger bled, the verse was fed. Now ink will run where angels tread. He smiles, satisfied. And for the first time, you realize that for Roland, this isn't just murder, it's publishing. You wake the next morning in the same city, but it somehow feels different. Maybe it's the fog lingering too long along the rooftops, or maybe it's the way people keep glancing at newspapers with a hush in their voices. Either way, Paris is holding its breath, and somewhere, Roland Mouret is already awake. He isn't the type to sleep in. Even when he does, he claims to dream in rhymed couplets. You trail behind him as he strides purposefully through Rue Saint-André-des-Arts, his boots clicking with literary arrogance. People greet him well. They nod politely, the way one nods at someone whose shoes are always too clean. He responds with a soft smile and eyes that always seem to look just past you. Roland was born to a banking family in Bordeaux, the kind of lineage that guarantees comfort, but not imagination. He rejected it, of course, dropped out of the lycée early and ran off to Paris with a copy of Les Fleurs du Mal and a suitcase full of carefully folded scarves. The Mouret name was still good for opening doors, but Roland didn't want finance. He wanted friction, tension, art. He enrolled in the Sorbonne under literature and philosophy, but never finished his degree. Too many professors accused him of willful pretentiousness, and one went as far as to call his early poems melodramatic self-indulgence in a waistcoat. Roland liked that review, and now he lives off a modest inheritance, contributes essays to obscure journals, and spends his days haunting bookshops and his nights writing about death, or more accurately, orchestrating it. But here's the thing, he doesn't see himself as a killer. He sees himself as a chronicler. You shadow him into a cafe near the Luxembourg Gardens Law, Rue Freud, a dim place that smells like wet stone and espresso. He orders without looking at the waiter. You notice the way he handles objects, like everything is either fragile or beneath him. His fingers are long, the nails manicured. He flips open a leather notebook and begins writing immediately. People in the cafe know him, or at least they think they do. The poet, they call him, or sometimes the boy who stares too long. A waitress once told another regular that she saw him cry into his wine while reading an obituary, but it's all a performance. Because while Roland writes, he also watches. A man sneezes violently across the room. Roland scribbles, "Winter claims us not in snow, but in the sudden rattle of unseen rot." He smiles at his own cleverness, then looks up, his gaze landing on a woman by the window. She's sketching, not him, thank God. Herself maybe, or the pigeons outside. Roland watches her a little too long, not because she's beautiful, though she is, but because she seems unaware of being watched. He makes a note of that. He's not planning anything, not yet. Inspiration must ripen. Back in his apartment that evening, Roland pins another poem to his wall. It's new, fresh, still bleeding metaphor. It reads like a confession, but you know better. It's more like a taunt. I told the night a secret tale, and dawn awoke. Already pale, one breath was mine, the next was theft. A verse began where hope had left. He reads it aloud once, to the cracked ceiling. Then again, slower. Each syllable is caressed like a name. He stares at the line, the next was theft. That's the one that matters. That's the line he wants someone to find. Roland doesn't care about the victim, rarely even remembers their name. What he remembers is the feeling, the surge, the thrill of divine theft. And yet it isn't random. You start to notice that he doesn't hurt children. Never anyone wealthy or powerful. Always those who slip between society's cracks. Lost souls, forgotten ones. The ones with no face in the crowd. That's how Roland justifies it. To him, he's giving their exit meaning. Immortality, a final stanza. But not everyone agrees. Back in a dingy station near Pont-Neuf, Inspector Lucien Gardet sits at his desk, surrounded by cigarette smoke and crumpled reports. He's not your typical policeman. There's something poetic in his own right about the way he observes people. His tie is crooked, his jacket wrinkled, but his eyes miss nothing. On his wall, pinned like museum artifacts, are 3 notes, each one found near a victim, each one written in the same meticulous hand. Gardet isn't sure yet who writes them, but he knows this. The person behind the poems is deliberate, intelligent, and dangerously artistic. A murderer with rhythm. He doesn't say it out loud, but the thought lingers. This killer thinks he's an artist. Gardet hates that. He keeps the notes in a folder labeled verse. Just that. No name, no file number, just verse. Like even writing it down as poems gives the killer too much dignity. Gardet lights another cigarette and circles a cafe address on the map, La Rue Freud. The same cafe Roland visits almost daily. They're getting closer, orbiting each other without knowing it. A poet and a policeman drawing nearer like the final 2 lines of a couplet destined to collide. Back in his apartment, Roland pours wine and recites older verses to himself, pretending they're prayers. He hums as he writes, a soft lullaby that doesn't belong in any nursery. He scratches out a line, starts over. The candle flickers beside him, and you realize, with a sudden shiver, he's not trying to get away with it. He wants someone to notice. You can feel it in the city now, that low humming tension that lives in the cracks between conversations and the pages of morning papers. The word poet doesn't carry the same innocent charm anymore, not when it shows up next to headlines like mystery verses found on Second Victim or Paris's Phantom. Rhymer strikes again. But Roland Murray, he reads those headlines with satisfaction. He even circles certain phrases, smiling when a journalist stumbles into accidental beauty. The phrase corpse poetry makes him chuckle over his morning toast, not because it's incorrect, but because it's clumsy. His writing deserves better nouns. You follow him one gray afternoon through the halls of a quiet library near the Sorbonne. It's old and musty, the kind of place where nothing modern dares exist. Roland isn't there for books. He's there for memory. He lingers at a small brass plaque on the wall, who died young by his own hand. By his own hand. Roland mutters the lines from memory. He bled, they praised. He starved, they saved. A librarian recognizes him. Monsieur Murray, she says, with a half smile that's part fear, part curiosity. Still chasing ghosts. Roland nods, polite. He's always polite, especially when he knows the other person will walk away wondering if they were just insulted. But he doesn't stay long. He has work to do, because lately things are escalating. The first poem was found quietly, unnoticed by the press. Just a strange little stanza in a coat pocket near an unconscious man. But the second that one made it to the papers, a woman discovered near Place de la République. No signs of struggle, no clear cause of death. But tucked inside her glove was a folded note bound, the same parchment Roland uses, written in the same narrow slanting hand. She danced alone through silent cries and wore the night like a disguise. The stars looked down, refused to speak, so I became the voice she'd seek. It doesn't take a scholar to see the pattern forming. The police haven't confirmed it publicly, but you can tell. Roland is no longer writing about death. He's using it. Each poem found near a body, each verse brimming with intimacy, like the killer knew their victim's Solor, wanted us to believe he did. That's the thing about poetry, after all. It's the lie that sounds true. At first, the public sees it as tragedy wrapped in mystery, the city's twisted little riddle. But when the third body appears this time, a man in his 50s, a former clerk who lived alone in Montparnasse, the note left on his chest is the most explicit yet. The verse speaks directly to the act, a breath I borrowed, sharp and brief, to carve my stanza into grief. Forgive the ink, forgive the crime. This line will outlive both our time. You hear the shift in the streets. People whisper differently now. Doors close earlier. Calf conversations lower their voices when a man in a coat enters. Anyone scribbling in a notebook gets a longer look. Poets, suddenly, have reputations, and Roland, he becomes bolder. He starts sending poems to small literary magazines. Not the ones with prestige, he avoids anything too visible, but the fringe publications, the ones that publish melancholic rants from men who wear scarves indoors. His work appears under pseudonyms, always strange, always eerie, and always laced with something that now reads as a little too real. One editor writes back, "Your verse is hauntingly specific. Who inspires you?" Roland doesn't reply. Instead, he starts leaving copies of his poems on park benches, slipped into books at used shops, pressed between cafe menus and tucked under saucers. Like little breadcrumbs for the braver, the foolish, and someone begins to notice. Not just the police. A man named Henry Villette, an amateur critic with a love for decadence and a talent for connecting dots, starts writing speculative essays. His latest piece, The Ink-Stained Phantom, dares to wonder aloud. What if the verses aren't fiction? What if the poet walks among us? Roland reads it, of course. He even underlines the phrase, whoever he is. He seems to believe his poetry has purpose, though the cost of such purpose may be blood. But it's not all ego. There's something else stirring now. A deeper hunger, a darker spiral. Because once you tie your art to suffering, well, how do you stop? You shadow Roland one damp evening as he returns to the place he left the second poem. Not to revisit, no, to re-listen. He believes places echo if you're quiet enough. He presses his palm against a cold stone wall and closes his eyes. And for a moment, you wonder if he's praying. Then you remember, to Roland, a prayer is a poem, and a poem requires sacrifice. In the station, Inspector Gardet leans over his desk with dark circles under his eyes. He's reading Villette's essay, not because he believes it all, but because it's the only piece brave enough to say what he's already thinking. He flips to the notes. 3 so far, 3 victims. All unrelated, all disposable, as society might cruelly categorize them. But the language, that's the link. Gardet begins sending samples to handwriting analysts, literary professors, even a failed playwright who once taught at the Sorbonne. They return vague responses, elegant, classical, morbidly refined. None of them help, but one comment sticks. This writer has studied not just poetry, but people, that Gardet understands too well. So he begins to map the murders, not where they happened, but where the poems were found, where the words lived longest. And when you overlay that with known poetry circles, you get something interesting. One small, recurring name, Roland Murray, not as a suspect, not even as a contributor, just a familiar attendee. A man who drinks quietly, quotes Verlaine too often, and seems to always leave before the room empties. The fourth line must burn. It's raining in Paris, again not the kind that makes people rush, but the slow, persistent drizzle that soaks collars and moods alike. You follow Roland as he walks through it without an umbrella, his coat gathering dampness like it's part of the uniform. It suits him. Melancholy looks good on him, and he knows it. He isn't headed to a cafe today, or a library. He's going somewhere quieter, a place where the world forgets to look. The 14th Arrondissement. Not picturesque, not poetic, but it has corners, forgotten spaces, places where people have stories no one listens to. That's what he tells himself. That's what helps him write. He stops at a laundromat, first grabs a flyer from the wall. It advertises piano lessons, or maybe a lost cat. He doesn't care. He just wants the paper. Then he walks 2 more blocks to a narrow stairwell that dips beneath a florist's shop. It leads to a dry, dusty cellar packed with cast-off books and records. A man down here sells used records out of crates labeled Divine, Desperate, and Dead. Roland buys a scratched Edith Piaf album and writes 3 lines of verse on the back of the receipt. She never wept for lack of rain, but for the stillness in the drain, where petals drowned, and no one came. He tucks the receipt into a book on a shelf and walks away. But the poem, that one lingers. He doesn't strike tonight. In cycles, there must be enough silence before the next note. He's begun seeing himself less as a writer and more as a conductor directing the tension between life and death, breath and verse. And you're starting to realize something else. Roland's not in control anymore. Not fully. The writing is starting to dictate him. You see it in the way he paces at night, muttering fragments under his breath, in the red ink staining his fingertips, in the way he winces when his work is imperfect, like it physically hurts to write something untrue. Back in his flat, the walls are covered now. Notes pinned up in neat, terrifying order. Not just poems, maps, timetables, names, observations, victim profiles. He's building something, drafting a design. You watch him pore over the notebook, where he keeps potential candidates. It's not a hit list, exactly, just a study. Details on strangers he's seen, the barista with the tremble in her hand, the man who talks to pigeons like they owe him something, the teenage girl who draws monsters on her jeans. He gives them titles instead of names. The unslept, the whisper walker, the girl with too many endings. Each has a short description, a potential stanza. One even has a full draft of a poem beneath it. You feel it, don't you? The shift from curiosity to obsession. He's not writing for Paris anymore. He's writing to someone. Maybe Gardette, maybe God, maybe the very concept of mortality. Whoever it is, they haven't answered yet. So Roland writes louder. Meanwhile, in a cramped attic not far from the Bastille, Henry Villette is writing his follow-up essay. He doesn't know Roland, not directly, but he's obsessed too. He's tracked the style through magazines and open mic nights. He's noticed the same metaphors reappearing, the recurring images veils, fog, silence, borrowed breath. He's begun to suspect a single author. He prints off the poem from Victim 3, tapes it to the wall. Beneath it, he scribbles. The voice is elegant, but the intent is surgical. Henry isn't trying to solve the crime. He's trying to understand it. And in doing so, he becomes the first person to recognize what's actually happening. These aren't spontaneous killings, they're compositions. Back at police headquarters, Gardette has received the handwriting analysis results. No conclusive ID, but the expert is clear. This hand belongs to someone formally trained, not just in penmanship, but in performance. The loops are theatrical, the spacing deliberate. It's not just poetry, she says. It's staged intimacy. Gardette frowns. But his biggest problem isn't the poetry, it's the lack of evidence. No fingerprints, no witnesses, not even camera footage. Just bodies and words, and it's the words that bother him most, because he's starting to believe them. Late at night, he finds himself reading the verses aloud, quietly, to no one, just to feel the weight of them in his mouth. And afterward, he always washes his hands. Roland, meanwhile, is preparing for what he calls the fourth. The fourth is different. The previous ones were drafts in his mind. This one will be a masterpiece. He doesn't just want to leave a note, he wants to leave a scene. He's chosen the setting, a derelict greenhouse outside the city limits, overgrown, half collapsed, glass shards like teeth in the walls, wild ivy curling through the cracks. It's tragic. It's perfect. He's sketched it, planned the lighting, the time of day. He even intends to leave a candle burning when he leaves a symbol, he says, of flickering thought. You stand beside him as he rehearses the lines in his head. They're longer this time, more intricate. It's not a stanza anymore. It's a confession masquerading as art. And in that greenhouse, he sees it already. The shape of a man slumped against a broken bench, a poem pinned to his chest like a medal. No blood, if he can avoid it. No mess, just stillness. He wants stillness. He wants it to echo. But more than anything, he wants you, the reader, the listener, the city too, finally see him not as a killer, but as a writer whose pen just happens to draw breath in the currency of others. The rain outside hasn't stopped. It trickles against the glass as Roland practices a single line again and again. The silence spoke, and I obeyed. You wonder when that line finally sees daylight, who will be left to listen? It's almost dawn when Roland sets out the sky, a dull steel blanket stretched over the city, with only a hint of light pressing through its folds. The streets are hushed, empty, but not lifeless. Just waiting. Always waiting. You walk with him in silence, every step echoing down the narrow sidewalks of the 20th arrondissement. His coat flutters at the edges, weighed down slightly not with guilt, but paper. In his inner pocket, he carries a folded parchment with ink still drying. It's titled For the Fourth, Whom I Heard Breathing. You don't get to read it yet. Not all of it. Roland keeps it tucked close to his heart like a relic, or maybe a ticking clock. There's something sacred in his pace, a kind of hush before the storm reverence. You can tell this one isn't just another offering. This is the one. The greenhouse is exactly where he left it, crumbling and forgotten, perched like an abandoned chapel among weeds and cracked stone. Ivy winds through the rusted doorframe, and the glass panes are smeared with dust, weather, and time. It's quiet in the way old bones are quiet. Roland steps inside. The place smells like rot and memory. Leaves curl in corners, and water collects in shallow, stagnant pools across the cracked tile floor. But Roland sees it differently. To him, it's a stage. The roof opens slightly above, revealing a patch of sky now shifting from gray to the softest pink. He lights a single candle and sets it beside a rusted spade. It flickers, waits, and then he waits too. Not for someone to catch him. No, Roland has already rehearsed every motion of this morning. He's waiting for the right moment to let the lines flow. But today, something's different. He's nervous. The pen in his hand doesn't feel like an extension of himself anymore. It feels like something watching him back. Because the poem for this fourth victim, it's already written, has been for weeks. But every time he reads it now, it sounds wrong. Hollow to clean. He paces, muttering stanzas to the ivy-choked windows. I held your breath in borrowed trust, and named your silence more than dust. Then he stops. It's not enough. Not anymore. This time the scene needs more than poetry. It needs presence. And he's already chosen the man who will complete it. You watch from a distance as Roland walks the few blocks to the man's home. The details come fast. An aging violinist who lives alone, once played with a minor conservatory, now mostly forgotten. A name Roland read in a program years ago and circled, simply because he liked the phrase retired virtuoso. The man answers the door in a robe, hair tousled, eyes wary but not alarmed. Roland smiles. They speak briefly. Not much is said, but Roland is disarming when he chooses to be. He's learned how to walk just on the edge of suspicion, never quite falling in. A conversation about old music, a compliment on the man's playing, and then the invitation. The violinist hesitates, but not for long. There's something about Rawlinsome quiet gravity that pulls. You don't see what happens next. Not exactly. That part, the precise part, is too quiet to off camera. But later, the police will find the man's body in the greenhouse, slumped gently, posed carefully, as if he sat down mid-performance and simply never got up. The candle still burns beside him, pinned to his chest, the poem. This time, the note is longer than any of the others. I met a man who played two ghosts, his strings cut clean through heaven's hosts. He smiled as though he understood that silence bleeds when left too good. I tuned his breath. I struck the chord, a final bow, a final word. The city awakens to it hours later. A groundskeeper finds the body, calls it in, and soon the greenhouse is surrounded by tape and tension. Gardet arrives within the hour, his coat soaked from rain and sweat and the weight of it all. This one's different, and he knows it immediately. There's something theatrical in the arrangement, something deliberate in the scene. This wasn't just a crime, it was an event. He reads the poem slowly, once to absorb, twice to hear the rhythm. There's no mistaking it anymore. This is the same hand as the others, and this time, it's not just a killer leaving poetry, it's a poet leaving murder. Gardet orders everything photographed, every scrap of paper, every drop of wax, every angle of the broken glass, letting light onto the victim's face. Then he steps outside for a moment, breathes. He's been chasing shadows for weeks, maybe longer, and now, finally, the killer has stepped out from behind the metaphor he's showing off. That's a mistake, because now Gardet knows what to look for. Back in the city, Roland walks the Seine, alone, tired. There's something almost anticlimactic in him now. You'd expect him to glow, to vibrate with artistic satisfaction, but instead, he just seems still. He's not smiling, not frowning either, just walking. He stops at a bench, takes out a small notebook, and begins to write not a poem, but a letter, a real one, addressed only to you who sees. The letter isn't confessional, it's reflective, observant, as if Roland is aware someone's following the trail, not the police, not the press, but someone quieter, someone who reads between the lines. And in the letter, he says something chilling. Each poem is a breath stolen from noise. But soon I will write one that breathes back. You'll know it when it arrives. It won't rhyme. It won't ask permission. You read that and feel it in your chest, like a held breath waiting to drop. Villette gets the news next. The greenhouse, the poem, the positioning, and he finally snaps the pattern into place. He overlays each poem, each scene, not geographically, but emotionally. He sees the cycle, the escalation. The writer isn't just expressing pain. He's learning how to narrate it better each time. And Henry, for the first time, types a name into a new document, Roland Murray, a gentle pen in a violent hand. He won't publish it, not yet. But the chase has begun. It's late evening now in Paris, the kind of soft, violet dusk that makes the whole city look like it's under a velvet curtain. Cafes hum with the leftover energy of the day. Someone plays accordion on a bridge near Isle St. Louis. You hear laughter in the background, footsteps, murmurs, the echo of cutlery against ceramic. Life goes on completely unaware that it's being watched from behind a poet's tired eyes. You trail Roland again, this time not as a predator, not exactly. Something in him has shifted since the greenhouse. The thrill is quieter, the purpose less urgent, but the need is still there. You can feel it pulsing under his skin like a second heartbeat. He walks into a small bookstore near Rue de la Roquette. He's been here before. The owner, a soft-spoken man with a beard and thick glasses, knows him only as R. They've exchanged books and quiet theories. Tonight, Roland trades a battered volume of Baudelaire's Les Fleurs, due Mal for a newer collection of essays on metaphysical poetry. But he's not here for books. He's watching the woman behind the counter. Her name is Eloise. She wears her grief like perfume, light but unmistakable. A silver locket tucked beneath her sweater. Her smile always half apologizing. Roland notices all of it. He sees in her a poem half written, waiting for a tragic metaphor to bring it to life. He doesn't speak to her, not yet. He observes. He sketches. Later, back in his flat, he writes a line. She turned the page as if the truth were brittle. You pause, you wonder, is she next? It doesn't seem clear. Roland's process isn't about rage or pattern. It's not about targeting the weak or avenging a wrong. He isn't a man pushed to violence. He's a man who believes violence has literary merit. You walk past his work table. See the red thread, the maps, the growing list of titles for future pieces. And beside that, a journal entry. Not a poem, not a confession. A personal thought, barely legible in graphite. The fourth is complete. But something feels stolen, not earned. Maybe the next must come not from observation, but from invitation. Invitation. That word sticks in your head as the scene shifts. Across town, Gardet is sitting in his car, staring at a parking ticket he hasn't removed for 3 days. He's not distracted by the case anymore. He's consumed. The poems, the staging, the sheer audacity of it, all it gnaws at him like a riddle that's been written in a language just beyond his reach. He's reading the greenhouse poem again. Every officer told him not to. Even the psychologist they keep on call warned him. Don't let the writing sink in. Don't let it charm you. But it is charming. That's what makes it dangerous. Gardet starts a board. A real one. Pushpins, strings, printed poems, mugshots of the victims. Though they don't look like victims in the photos, they look still, like they belong in sepia frames. He draws a line through each. Each scene represents something. Regret, misremembering, missed timing, unplayed music. The greenhouse one. That one is about loss. Gardet isn't a poetry man, but he's slowly becoming one. Meanwhile, Roland watches the news reports with a flat stare. He sees his words recited by anchors, quoted by online commentators, dissected by experts who, frankly, don't know what they're talking about. They talk about his style, his signature, as though they're describing a wine or a fashion brand. He hates it, not because he doesn't want to be known, but because they're getting it wrong. And that's the unforgivable part. Maybe anonymously, something to correct the interpretation. But then he decides no, he'll correct it the only way he knows how. Through the next piece, so you watch him return to Eloise's bookstore. Not to hurt her. Not yet. Possibly not ever. He simply hands her a note. Folded, sealed. She opens it as he leaves, frowning slightly. You get to see it only briefly, over her shoulder. You speak in half-forgotten bookmarks. Would you dine with me and explain the rest? It's signed only with a single letter, R. She does not throw it away. The next day, they meet at a quiet cafe in Ballville. No pretense, just two strangers who talk about everything except themselves. Roland is careful. He lets her steer the conversation. He listens more than he speaks, and that's what makes it worse. Because for the first time in this entire twisted journey, you wonder if Roland is hesitating, if something about this woman, this moment has fractured the cycle. He walks her home that night, doesn't follow her in, doesn't take a note, doesn't even write about her afterward. Instead, he stares at the empty page, the candle flickering low beside him, and he murmurs something under his breaths, something you almost miss. Maybe silence is the purest line. But even as he says it, you know he doesn't believe it. He can't stop. Because silence doesn't echo. And Roland, he needs the echo. Back in the attic, Henry Villette finishes a piece he'll never publish. It's titled The Author Behind the Curtain, a premeditated performance. He's found the pattern now. He's convinced each victim was a character first, not random, chosen for symbolic weight, chosen for their silence, and he writes something eerily close to the truth. This killer is not reliving trauma. He is curating it. He selects scripts and stages as if each death is an act in a long, strange play. And the city is his reluctant audience. It's midnight when Gardet knocks on Valette's door. No warning, just presence. Valette opens it slowly. "Detective," he says, more curious than scared. "I need to ask you about poetry," Gardet replies. Neither of them sleeps that night. You can tell it's a different kind of morning because Roland hasn't picked up his pen. The window is still fogged from the cold night. The candle stub from last night hasn't been replaced. His journal sits open to a blank page, and he just watches it, as if waiting for it to write itself. He stirs his coffee slowly. No rush, no purpose, just motion. You'd think the quiet means he's at peace, but you know better by now. Roland isn't resting. He's recalibrating. You sit with him in that silence, and it's almost peaceful till he does something unexpected. He opens a box beneath the bed. Inside, a bundle of yellowing newspaper clippings. Most are brittle, headlines faded, but the names are still readable. You see dates stretching back years, some nearly a decade old. These are not his works. These are the works of others, other murders. You watch his eyes scan a particular article from Vienna. A man found in a train tunnel, posed beneath a broken clock face, with a cryptic stanza chalked onto the wall above him. Unsolved, filed away. Forgotten by everyone except this man, sitting cross-legged on the floor with ink smudges on his fingers. You realize something then? He didn't invent this concept. He inherited it. Roland is a continuation, a sequel, maybe even an admirer. And that's when you notice the small penciled note in the corner of one clipping. For C, always in meter. Whoever C was, they started. Something Andreland picked up the thread, not as a copycat, but as a believer, a disciple of violent beauty, of performance. You feel the bottom drop out. This isn't a lone poet's spiral. It's a tradition, and it has rules. Cut to Gardet, hunched over Valette's tiny desk. The detective is scribbling furiously on a pad of cheap paper, while Henry reads off notes from his computer. The two men are building a psychological map of the killer, not just a profile, but a voice, an ethos. He doesn't just want to be known, Henry says, his voice low, reverent almost. He wants to be interpreted. Gardet grimaces, and we've been giving him exactly what he wants. But Valette shakes his head. No, not quite. He wants a rival, someone to debate his work, not just admire it. You don't kill like this for attention. You kill like this for a response. That's when they hatch the idea. A trap, not the usual kind. No cops hiding behind doors. No midnight stakeouts or fake identities. This trap is made entirely of words. Valette will publish a column, a very particular column. It will speak directly to Roland without naming him. It will call him out as a pretender, a fraud, a poet who borrows imagery but lacks originality. It will challenge his rhythm, insult his symmetry, and worst of all, suggest that the most recent piece lacked meaning. It will strike precisely where Roland is most vulnerable, his pride. And you know what? It works. The moment the piece hits print, Roland finds it. He doesn't rage, he doesn't pace. He simply folds the paper very carefully and slides it into a drawer. Then he begins writing, not a rebuttal, a response. And it's not poetic, it's instructional. You lean in as the words unfold across the page. If you think I lack purpose, then choose the subject. Name the theme. Let us collaborate even in your protest. Paris is the canvas. Tell me what to paint. It's chilling, like a gauntlet thrown in a whisper. Valette receives the letter 2 days later, mailed. No return address, but the calligraphy is unmistakable. He reads it 3 times, then calls Gardet. They decide to answer. Another column appears, this one more provocative. This time Villette suggests a theme. Write about memory. About what the city forgets. He waits, and soon a body appears in an abandoned station of the Paris metro, one of those ghost stations no longer in use. Sealed off since the 1930s. The man is posed beneath an ancient map of the city, faded and flaking. In his hand, a vintage metro ticket dated 1942, a time of deep, complex memory for Paris. Pinned to his chest, a poem. This station once knew fear and flight, now echoes hold the weight of night. You asked for memory. Unspoken, raw, I gave you silence beneath the law. Villette reads it and says nothing. Gardet says everything. This has to stop. But Villette disagrees. Quietly, it's working, because now they have something they never had before. Control Roland has changed tactics. He's answering prompts, creating on command. And that, Gardet thinks, is a leash, however fragile. What they don't realize is that Roland isn't being controlled. He's being validated. And to him, that's worse. The next few days pass without incident. No new letters, no poems. The city exhales. But then, one morning, Gardet wakes to a small envelope beneath his windshield wiper. Inside, a note in delicate handwriting. You sought a duet, but poetry dies in echo chambers. Shall we attempt a trio? It's signed simply, R. And attached is something far stranger, a sketch. It's not of a victim. It's of a room. A very specific room. Gardet recognizes it instantly. It's Villette's study. The message is clear. Roland knows who he's been writing to. He's known all along, and now he's no longer answering. He's leading. The rain hits Paris with that cold, soaking insistence that makes the city feel older than it is. Even the Seine seems to slump beneath the weight of it, like it's tired of being romanticized. You're inside Villette's study now, or at least you're imagining it, as he finds the sketch of his own room rendered in perfect, intimate detail. He doesn't speak at first. He doesn't need to. Gardet is the one pacing, dripping, muttering about security and threats, and whether they should go dark. But Villette, he just stares at the sketch, then gently folds it along the faintest crease and places it in a drawer. Not out of sight, exactly, just where it can't dominate the room. You're beginning to see how this has become a strange dance for both men. Villette is no longer the amateur consultant. Gardet is no longer the detached investigator. This has gone personal, and not in a way that comes with a tidy resolution. You think back to Roland. Somewhere out there, maybe at this very moment, he's watching them. Or maybe he's not. Maybe he's writing, calmly, while his coffee cools beside him. Maybe he's even smiling because now he's reached the part of the story where he starts playing with narrative. Because he's not just crafting scenes anymore. He's crafting anticipation. And tonight, he's going to change the tone. You follow him through a bookstore, not Eloise's, but another one. This one older, dustier, the kind of place that feels like it should have secrets in the floorboards. He's not browsing. He's hunting. You watch his fingers trail over spines like they're names in a ledger. Eventually, he pulls one. It's an obscure volume of post-war French surrealist poetry. Inside, he's hidden a small slip of paper, a pre-written line. The next is already listening. Please speak clearly. And then he slides it back onto the shelf. You don't know who that message is for, but you know someone will find it. Across the city, Eloise is also starting to feel the shift. She hasn't seen Roland in days, not since that night they walked through Beauville, exchanging philosophical jokes and quoting dead poets. He hasn't written, no cryptic letters, no folded stanzas, nothing. She should be relieved. She isn't. Because the absence doesn't feel like peace. Sit feels like suspense. And then, one evening, she finds a gift on her doorstep. No card, You flip through it with her page after page of creamy, untouched space. At the very back, the final page bears a message. Not everything worth remembering must be written. Her hand trembles slightly, not from fear, from recognition. She knows now. Not everything, not the details, but enough to understand that she's not just part of the story. She may be its resolution. Meanwhile, Gardette is spiraling, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, in the quiet, functional way that most detectives unravel. He starts missing things, appointments, meals. Valette notices, doesn't comment, but you do. You see how Gardette is beginning to think like Roland. He's started journaling, not facts, impressions, feelings, metaphors. You find a line scrawled in one of his notebooks. He doesn't kill for the poem. The poem is the byproduct of what he can't say in person. You wonder who that line is really about. But then something strange happens. It's unfinished. He knows better. This is the setup for something different. Then one morning, Valette receives a phone call. It's Eloise. She doesn't ask for help, doesn't scream, doesn't cry. She simply says, "He left me something else. You should see it." They meet at the bookstore after closing hours. The lights are off except for one dim reading lamp in the back. She's holding a small painting, done in watercolor. The brushwork is delicate, uncertain. It depicts a bridge in the rain, specifically Ponte Arts, famous for the thousands of lovers who once padlocked their initials there before the city removed them. In the foreground, there's a figure facing away, alone, and in the corner, a caption in gold ink. The final piece is not death, it's forgetting. You feel the air go still. This is a goodbye. But to whom Valette takes the painting, examines every inch. There's no fingerprint, no hidden code, no accompanying verse. Just Art. Gardette, when he sees it, says only, "He's going to disappear." Valette agrees. It reads, "You have watched, you have wondered, you have even responded. So let's finish it together. One night, one audience. Come alone, bring the detective. I will meet you at the opera." It's signed with a drawing, this time a quill, broken in half. You're almost afraid to ask what it means. Gardette isn't. He wants to end it where performance lives. Valette nods. The Opera Garnier, neither man hesitates. They choose a night, 3 days from now, a private tour, after hours, arranged quietly through a few favors. No backup, no ambush. They're going into the lion's den on his terms. But Roland isn't a lion. He's a playwright who's decided it's time for the curtain call. You feel it the moment they step inside, the way the Opera Garnier breathes when no one else is around. Not just echoes and old velvet, but something deeper. Like the building remembers things. The creak of ancient steps. The hushed footsteps of ghosts in tuxedos. The ghosts, tonight, are wearing plain coats and hard shoes, Gardette and Valette. They don't talk as they walk in. It's not just respect for the space, it's because they know words don't matter anymore. The game has shifted out of the mind and into the real. You follow them down the grand marble staircase, past gilded cherubs and cracked mirrors. The chandeliers are dimmed but still glitter faintly. In a way, it's beautiful. In another way, it feels like being inside a dream that someone else scripted. They arrive at the orchestra level. Every seat is empty, every red cushion untouched. And yet one seat, in the center of the third row, holds a folded piece of paper. Valette picks it up. It reads, "To see the final act, one must first sit still. Truth does not arrive in footsteps, waits on stage. They sit and wait." For nearly 10 minutes, nothing happens. Just the groan of an old heating system, the occasional flicker of shadow. You can hear their breathing, hear yours. And then the curtain rises. No music, no lights. Just a man, Roland. He's standing center stage, dressed in black, holding a notebook. He doesn't speak right away. He doesn't need to. His presence is enough. still contained, like something rehearsed again and again in the mirror, but never shared. And then, gently, he opens the notebook and begins to read. But it's not poetry, not this time. It's a letter. To the city that raised me without knowing me, to the strangers who read my words before they read the headlines. I author this. You can barely breathe. He speaks slowly, calmly. He doesn't confess. He narrates. He talks of memory, of silence, of how art used to live in violence, in war, in tragedy, and how he believed he was continuing that tradition. He calls his acts performances of forgetting. He claims he chose those who had already vanished in the margins of the city, the undocumented, the lonely, the overlooked. And in some twisted way, he thought he was giving them permanence. They were invisible, he says. Now, you remember them, even if you only remember the rhyme. He pauses, looks straight at the empty seats. I thought I was writing for history, but I was only writing for myself. That's when you realize this is the goodbye, not a surrender, a finale. Gardet stands. This ends tonight. But Roland raises a hand. No, it ended the night you published your reply. Valette doesn't speak. He knows. This was never about evading capture. This was about creating something that would last longer than prison, longer than fear. Roland steps back from the spotlight and vanishes behind the curtain. Gardet bolts, Valette follows. Backstage is a labyrinth: ropes, sandbags, catwalks. The air is thick with dust and old ambition. They split up instinctively. You stay with Valette as he climbs narrow iron stairs. He's not calling out. He knows better than to break the silence. You reach the top level, a maintenance corridor behind the upper boxes. No sign of him. Just one more note, taped to the inside pocket. You heard me. That's enough. Let the city rest. Gardet finds nothing. The building is searched. Nothing. It's like he evaporated. Except you know he didn't. He closed the performance. The police are notified. There's a quiet inquiry, but no charges are filed. No confession, no arrest, no formal end. Just a man who told his own story so convincingly, he slipped out of it before anyone could trap him inside it. In the days that follow, the city waits for a body, a poem, a sign, but none come. Eloise keeps the painting, hangs it in her office. Customers ask about it. She says it's anonymous. Valette stops writing columns, quietly, and somewhere, maybe in another city, someone picks up a pen. You wonder, was this really about poetry? Or was this about control? Because Roland didn't just kill and write, he created a framework, a game of response and ritual, of myth and metaphor, a puzzle built with pages, and now the puzzle is unsolvable. You think of the opera, of that empty stage, of the echo, and you realize something chilling. The echo was the point. One day, months later, Valette receives a postcard. No return address, no message, just a photograph of a new graffiti mural in Buenos Aires. It's a poem, painted on a wall beside a subway exit. The signature, a broken quill. You can't sleep that night, can you? Not after the opera. Not after watching a man vanish in plain sight, leaving only echoes and symbols behind. You lie in bed and feel the weight of it settle like dust across your chest. All those poems, all those clues, and none of them ever truly meant to be solved. You realize now, Roland wasn't chasing infamy. He wasn't even chasing meaning. He was chasing erasure. He wanted to be remembered only long enough to be mythologized and then to dissolve entirely. You think about Gardet, about how he must be taking all this. The man spent months clawing at shadows, only to have the shadow turn around, smile, and disappear. It's not justice. It's theater. And Gardet, for all his cynicism, was still hoping for something real. A name on a file, a sentence handed down, a man in cuffs, but all he got was a final act with no applause. And Valette, He's not angry, he's quiet. He walks through Paris like he's trying not to wake it. No more columns, no more interviews. He's seen what happens when narrative spirals into reality, and he doesn't want to push the city any further. But here's the thing, even though Roland is gone, his script lingers. A few weeks after the opera, another envelope arrives. Not to Valette this time, to Eloise. It's a poem, anonymous. But the cadence is unmistakable. You'd recognize his rhythm anywhere. It's about gardens in winter, about things blooming too late, about how sometimes beauty comes too quietly to be noticed in time. At the bottom, a single line. You were always the only one who read the silences. She doesn't cry. She doesn't call the police. She just places the envelope into the notebook he once left her, tucks it between two blank pages, and closes the cover. Not everything needs to be displayed. Some things are just meant to be held. But now, the city is different. People start seeing him. Not really, of course. But stories begin circulating. A man on a rooftop in Montmartre, whispering lines from Baudelaire into the wind. A stranger on the metro leaving handwritten verses on seats. A bookstore owner in Marseille claims a thin man in black bought a rare Rambo collection, paid in exact change, and left behind a rose. Urban legend, maybe, but Paris is a city of legends. It drinks them like wine, and so Roland becomes something else. Not a killer, not a fugitive, a ghost, a literary phantom who once turned murder into metaphor, and then vanished before he could be trapped by either. Gardet retires early. Valette moves to Lyon. Eloise keeps her bookstore, but you notice she no longer stocks modern poetry. Only classics, only names long dead, and you. You walk through the city with a little more suspicion now. You pass statues and wonder who they were before someone decided they deserved stone. You see graffiti in alleys and question whether it's art, or a message, or both. You read poetry and hear whispers between the lines. Because Roland changed more than the crime scene. He changed how the city reads itself. A few journalists try to reignite the case. They call him the poetic phantom. Others say he was just a narcissist with a flair for the dramatic. But they never get traction. The story resists definition. The facts blur at the edges. A year passes, then two, and on a quiet April evening, with cherry blossoms shedding their last petals into the gutter, Valette receives another letter. Handwritten, no return address. He opens it with steady hands. The ink is smudged slightly, as though written on a train. The paper smells faintly of tobacco and mint. It's a short poem, just 4 lines. When you stand on the Pont Neuf at night, and the wind forgets which way to blow, no, I am not far just outside the light, still writing what you're too wise to know. Valette folds the letter slowly, says nothing. But that night he does something strange. He goes back to Paris, just for a weekend. You follow him naturally. He walks the bridges, sits alone in silence. He's not searching, he's listening. And at dawn, he leaves a single page on a cafe table. You catch a glimpse before he walks away. It's a poem. We never caught him. But we heard the echo, and in the quiet that followed, we chose to listen. That's the last time he writes anything publicly. Gardet doesn't respond when asked about Roland anymore. He says only, "You don't arrest ghosts," and Eloise. She sometimes reads that winter garden poem aloud during open mic nights, but never explains it, never gives context, just lets it hang in the air, and you sit here thinking about it all, about a man who killed not for pleasure or vengeance or greed, but for the shape of a line, the rhythm of a stanza. You don't excuse him, but you understand now. For Roland, the city wasn't made of buildings and roads and people. It was made of pauses, and he wrote in the space between them. You wake the next morning with the city still pressing against your ribs. Paris doesn't let go easily, not after something like this. You can walk all day through its alleys, past the wrought iron balconies and faded blue street plaques, and still feel like the story is following just a step behind you, quiet, but not gone. And maybe that's exactly what Roland wanted. Not just to be remembered, but to be carried. In the weeks after Valette's return to Paris, the atmosphere subtly shifts. People who once dismissed poetry now glance at the margins of newspapers, half hoping for a final verse. Street artists begin adding lines of ambiguous text to their murals, sometimes hopeful, sometimes bitter, but always unresolved. There's a hunger for interpretation, for connection, for meaning. And in the quiet corners of the city bookstores, cafes, metro benches, you hear whispers. No one says his name. No one dares. But you can tell when someone's referring to him. Their eyes shift sideways. Their tone drops. They're not talking about a murderer. They're invoking a myth. But mythology has weight, and not everyone is handling it well. You hear that Gardet has started seeing a therapist, though he'd never call it that. Someone to talk to, he says gruffly when pressed. He's lost weight, quit smoking, started jogging again, though not for health. More like he's trying to chase something that's always a few steps ahead. Closure, maybe, or the version of himself he used to believe in. One afternoon, he visits the Pont Alexander III. The wind is sharp, and the sky is bleached white with cloud. He stands at the edge, staring into the water, where reflections waver like memories. You watch him closely, wondering what he sees, wondering if he's looking for signs. A floating page, a ripple, anything. He doesn't find it. But before he leaves, he tucks something beneath the base of a lamppost. A small envelope taped gently to the metal. You're too far to see the contents, but you know it's not a report, or a threat, or a plea. It's probably a poem. Elsewhere, a new name begins appearing in Parisian literary circles. Nothing dramatic, just quiet mentions, little nods at readings and workshops. A poet who doesn't show up, but whose work circulates in hand-copied fragments. No official publication, no social media, but always that same rhythm, that same restraint. People speculate. A disciple, maybe, an admirer, or Roland himself. You learn that someone is leaving notebooks in train stations, handmade, filled with blank pages except for the first line. Always the same. What you write here, the city will remember. You can't help but be intrigued, and Paris, being what it is, responds in kind. Strangers fill those books with heartbreak, gossip, shopping lists, confessions. The lines between fiction and confession blur. You start to wonder, is the city becoming the poem now? It's spreading. Paris has become a breathing manuscript, and you, like everyone else, have been given a pen. Still, in the midst of all this, you can't shake the question, what did he want? Not fame, not money, certainly not forgiveness. No. You're beginning to suspect the truth is something more intimate, more disturbing. He wanted someone to follow the trail, not to catch him, but to feel what he felt. The thrill of construction, the intimacy of a phrase sharp enough to draw blood, the godlike control of shaping how someone sees the world, even for just a moment. He wanted someone to need the answer, but never find it. He wanted you to be the echo. You think back to that night at the Opera Garnier, the way his voice sounded not triumphant, not broken, just steady, certain, and you remember the way the curtain fell, not with a bang, but with a breath, because the end, for Roland, wasn't the goal. The drift was, the slow unraveling, the eternal pause between question and reply. You begin to notice how many places in the city now feel haunted, not with fear, but with intention. That bench in Parc Monceau, the alcove in the Latin Quarter, where someone chalked a line from Verlaine, the alley near Rue Oberkampf, where a painted quill trembles in the rain. They are not coincidences, they are installations. The city is no longer merely observed, it is curated, and in that curation, Roland lives on. You wonder if you'll ever meet him again. Not in the flesh, maybe, but in form, in shape, in story. Perhaps he's done writing. Perhaps he's just changed medium. After all, who's to say a poet must always use words? Gardet once muttered, almost bitterly, that Roland's real crime wasn't murder, it was authorship. He authored a version of the city that no one can unsee. He rewrote Paris without changing a single street name. And now, everyone walks inside that version. Even you. The weather has turned. Spring settles heavily into Paris, as if the entire city is exhaling in slow, perfumed drafts. You walk through the Jardin des Plantes, where the gravel crunches beneath your shoes and blossoms hang lazily in the air. Their colors overly rich, too vivid, as though they've been painted by someone desperate to be remembered. And still, even now, the story of Roland d'Arsenault moves like a river just beneath the surface of things. It hums in doorways and behind the hiss of the espresso machine. It curls through open windows and lingers in overheard fragments of conversation. You hear two women discussing him in low tones at a sidewalk cafe. One says she thinks he was never real. Just a metaphor, she says, with a little shrug. A clever invention. Her friend, older, sharper around the eyes, disagrees. Real or not, she murmurs, he changed things. That's the only kind of real that matters. And that's where it begins to dawn on you. Reality in this city is entirely up for interpretation. You notice more and more street art appearing lines of verse etched into the mortar between bricks, or delicately painted into the cracks of ancient stairwells. Not all of it is brilliant. Some of it is maudlin or unfinished, but even that seems intentional, as if Roland has become less a man and more a permission slip, a license to speak, to confess, to reshape. You visit the cemetery at Montparnasse, where Eloise once told you she used to walk when she needed to think. You do not know why you go there exactly. Perhaps, like the rest of the city, you are hoping to find some trace, some anchor point in this story that has never quite settled. But there is nothing dramatic waiting. No headstone with hidden markings, no freshly turned earth, just the silent, steady dignity of stone and time. You sit on a bench and realize you are no longer waiting for resolution. You're beginning to live inside the question. And that, curiously, is when something shifts. A letter arrives for you. Not an email, not a message on actual envelope, postmarked with a Parisian stamp. The handwriting is unfamiliar, but careful, elegant, almost antiquated. Inside, a single page, not typed, inked, a poem. I saw you in the reflection, looking for what I already left. You mistook the silence for absence, but I never promised theft. There's no signature, no hint of who sent it. You read the poem again and again, until the edges of the words begin to blur. The line, "You mistook the silence for absence," sticks in your mind like a thorn. It occurs to you with the slow, unsettling certainty of something long repressed, that perhaps Roland has always been watching, not in the sinister, overbearing way of a stalker or a fugitive, but more like an artist admiring the audience from the wing's content to let them interpret, argue, disbelieve. You think, maybe he's always been part of Paris, the way the damp creeps into the walls, or how certain buildings seem to lean a little too closely toward each other, whispering. That evening, at dusk, you return to Eloise's shop. You don't expect her to be there. She rarely is these days, but you find the lights on, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air is heavy with the scent of aged paper and sandalwood, that curious perfume of silence and stories. She looks up when you enter and offers the faintest smile. No words pass between you, but she gestures to the back shelf where a new display has appeared. It isn't labeled, just a cluster of small notebooks, each one hand-bound, their covers blank except for a single phrase etched into the spine. Begin where the silence ends. You pick one up, open it. The first page is blank, the paper thick and grainy beneath your fingers. Then, faintly, you see its another line, hidden in the texture like a watermark. Not everything unfinished is incomplete. You think about Roland again, not the man, not even the killer, but the idea. The architect of absence. The composer of spaces where interpretation must do the work that facts refuse. And slowly, you begin to understand. This was never about closure. It was about creating something too slippery to hold, too compelling to ignore. A story that didn't end so much as evaporate, leaving behind only vapor and verse. In that way, it becomes more powerful than any headline or conviction ever could. Later, as you walk along the Seine, the streetlights blur into gold ribbons across the water. Somewhere, someone is playing a cello behind an open window. You pause on the Pont Marie, staring out over the city, and feel not sadness, not fear, but reverence. Like you've wandered into a cathedral built out of ambiguity. You take the notebook from your coat pocket, and you write something. Not because you think Roland will read it, not because it solves anything, but because somehow, in this version of the city, writing is the only thing that makes sense. The only act that answers the echo with something other than silence. Your hand trembles slightly. The pen touches the paper, and Paris listens. The days stretch longer now, though Paris never fully emerges from its haze. The sky wears its usual expression of detached melancholy, and you've grown used to that muted light that seems to pause time just slightly. There's something about this city that teaches you how to be patient with uncertainty. Or perhaps it teaches you how to live with ghosts. You walk the Rue Saint-Antoine one late afternoon, your fingers curled around the notebook. You haven't opened since you wrote in it by the Seine. You haven't shown the page to anyone. You're not even sure what you wrote. It was instinctive, as if the pen had moved on its own, guided by mood, memory, the weight of the past weeks. Maybe even by Roland's hand. Or maybe that's exactly what he wanted you to think. You glance down alleyways now, like you used to glance over your shoulder in dark parking garages. Not out of fear, exactly, but out of that strange, familiar itch, paranoia, dressed as curiosity. The sense that the city is layered, and you're only seeing one version at a time, and at any moment, a slip, a glimpse, a phrase in chalk on the wall, any of it, could break the illusion. It happens again at the Luxembourg Gardens. You stop beneath a sycamore tree where a child has drawn a rough spiral in the dirt with a stick. You don't know why that catches your attention, but your gaze lingers. A spiral, a symbol of return, of recursion, of descent, depending on how you draw it. On the bench beside you is a newspaper someone left behind, folded to the classifieds. You flip through it idly. There it is. A letter is waiting in the train station at midnight. Line 14. Direction, Olympiades. Bring no luggage. Leave with what you find. Your pulse tightens. Of course, it could be nothing. A prank. A poetic gesture from some teenager who read one too many noir novels. But you know better now. You know how Roland speaks. Or doesn't. You know what silence can mean. So you go. At 11:48 p.m., you're standing at the Chatelet platform, one of the busiest, coldest, most echoing stretches of concrete in Paris, and it's almost empty. The last few stragglers pull their coats tighter and stare into their screens. You stand beneath the flickering light, your reflection in the plexiglass of the map looking back at you like a version of yourself who already knows what's coming. The train arrives. You step inside. No one speaks. You ride in silence, two Olympiades' eyes scanning every detail, adds graffiti. The scuffed plastic of the seats, the rhythm of the tracks underneath like a drumbeat, composed by someone deliberately avoiding resolution. At the final stop, you disembark, and there it is. Not a person, not a trap. Just a small white envelope tucked into the backrest of a bench, the kind you'd miss entirely if you weren't trained to look for things that don't belong. You hesitate, half expecting it to vanish when you blink, but it doesn't. You take it, open it. Another poem, of course, but this one is different. Longer, more narrative. It reads almost like a confession, or a warning, or maybe an apology buried in metaphor. You sit and read it twice, then a third time. It tells a story of a man who wrote his future out of desperation, and then had to kill the version of himself that didn't believe in it. A story of a city that never judges, only absorbs. At the bottom, a line: "This is not the last time you'll hear from me." You fold the letter carefully, like it might dissolve in your hands if you move too quickly. Outside, the night has deepened. The silence in this part of the city is more profound, more private. You feel like you've entered a forgotten page of a forgotten book left open, just for you. And then, in the corner of the platform, you see a figure. Just for a moment, a man in a long coat, facing the tiled wall, motionless. Then, with the turn of a head, he vanishes around the bend. No sound of footsteps, no creak of the exit door. Just gone? You don't chase him. You don't need to. The point was never to catch Roland. The point was always to follow. In the weeks that follow, letters begin appearing all over the city. Not poems this time. Not riddles. Letters addressed to you. Sometimes left under your door. Sometimes slipped into the pages of books you haven't yet opened. They aren't signed, but they're unmistakable. The cadence, the focus, the way they seem to describe things no one else could. No memories you barely remember yourself. They start gently observational, kind even then. They become instructional, philosophical, the kind of messages that could either ruin your grip on reality or elevate you into some poetic priesthood of ambiguity. And eventually, you understand this isn't just about him anymore. He's grooming you, preparing you, not for murder, you don't think. At least not the physical kind, but for a shift, a replacement, a succession of roles. He's retiring. He wants someone to continue the story. You're not sure whether to be honored or horrified, but deep down, you already know your answer. Because when the city speaks in metaphor, you've learned to respond in kind. And when the story knocks at your door, you always open it. You don't sleep well anymore. Not because you're afraid, but because the dreams have changed. They've become more lucid, more architecturalized, though they were designed by someone else. Someone who understands your rhythms, your anxieties, your quietest thoughts, and then builds dreamscapes around them like a playwright staging a show only you are meant to see. And always, in these dreams, you are walking through some version of Paris. The streets look familiar at first, but then begin to curve in impossible ways. The buildings have no doors, the windows peer back at you, and the voices that rise from the cafes speak only in verse. You wake each morning more disoriented than the last, not in fear, but in fascination. The line between waking and sleeping, real and constructed, has become so thin it almost isn't there at all. You sip your coffee slowly now, as if each drop is tethering you back to a gravity you're not entirely convinced you need. The letters haven't stopped. They arrive more frequently, now sometimes 2 or 3 in a day. No return address, no explanation. They vary in length. Some are only a single sentence. Others are long, tangled meditations on identity, authorship, anonymity. One compares you to a lens you are not meant to be seen, only to show others what is already there. Another simply says, "Do not look for me. Look for what you become when I am done with you." You try to tell yourself you're not being manipulated, that there's no cult here, no formal induction, no secret handshake behind the shadow of a bookshelf. But you've seen the way people look at you now, especially in the bookstore, where Eloise lets you sit behind the counter some afternoons. They speak to you slowly, carefully, as if testing whether you know something they're not sure they want confirmed. And you do. You know more than you'd like to admit. You've started to feel something inside yourself rearranging, an inner architecture shifting to accommodate whatever is coming next. It isn't long before you notice a new kind of follower on your social accounts. People with handles like @versus inink and @thelist metaphor. They comment in code, in fragments from Roland's older work, and sometimes strangely with lines that haven't been published anywhere, at least not publicly. You begin to realize the network is larger than you imagined, and older. These aren't mere fans, they're part of a structure, an invisible scaffolding propping up the myth of Roland Darcy. One evening, as the wind carries a low hum through the streets near Montmartre, you receive a parcel. This is different. Not just a letter, but a small box, carefully wrapped in faded gray paper. Inside is a single object, a fountain pen. Beautiful, old, heavy in your hand. Tucked beneath it, a note in the unmistakable slanting script. You already know what this is for. Use it wisely. Use it when you're ready to disappear. It hits you then. The final truth behind all this myth-making. This wasn't just about Roland writing a poem so profound it demanded blood. It was about writing a self into legend. Writing so deeply, so deliberately, that the author becomes untraceable, undefined, erased in the act of creation. And maybe that's what he wanted from you all along. Not a protege, a replacement. Not someone to uncover him, someone to become him. You could walk away. You could toss the letters, delete the posts, move to another city with narrower streets and shallower ghosts. But you don't. You can't. Because something inside you now craves that murky presence. That in-between state where truth and art tangle so thoroughly you no longer feel the need to pull them apart. Paris is beginning to feel different to you too. Not in its geography, but in its logic. You start seeing patterns in how the shadows fall, in how the pigeons move, in how snippets of strangers' conversations form almost poems without trying. You walk without destination, and the city responds. It opens to you like a stage play, as though you are both actor and audience at once. You remember something Eloise once said. We never truly meet Roland. We only meet the version of ourselves he leaves behind. You didn't understand it at the time. Now you do. Because you no longer feel like someone who is watching the story. You feel like someone who is writing it. That's when the final letter comes. Not delivered, not hidden. It's already inside your notebook, waiting for you on the last page. When the voice becomes yours, don't whisper my name. Let the silence sign it. Let the myth remain. There's no instruction, no signature. Just those 4 lines etched in a hand that's now indistinguishable from your own. And you know it's time. You take the pen, you pick up the notebook, and for the first time you begin to write not as an observer, not as a searcher, but as the voice, as the myth, as the man who vanished so thoroughly that his echo had to find another body to inhabit. You write with calm hands, no fear, no thrill, just certainty. The story will go on, and Paris will never know the difference. You wake early on a Sunday, though there's no alarm to blame. The city outside your window is unusually still, wrapped in a soft gray mist that seems reluctant to lift. You sit at your small wooden table by the window, the one where Roland once left that napkin folded like a secret. A cup of tea steams beside you, untouched. In your hand, the pen, his pen, now yours, feels heavier than it did last night. Heavier, but not unfamiliar. The letters have stopped. No final farewell, just silence. As if the city has decided it's time for the next chapter to begin. And Roland, whatever or whoever he truly was, has stepped aside to let the story continue without him. In that space, something subtle has shifted. You don't feel abandoned, you feel inherited, as though a role has passed to you not through ceremony, but through understanding. You don't tell anyone. Not Eloise, not the quiet old man who hands you his library, returns with trembling fingers and watchful eyes. This is not a secret to be shared. It is not even a secret at all. It is simply something that is now true. The pages you write in the days that follow are not poems in the traditional sense. They are instructions, glimpses, symbols, descriptions of moments that haven't happened yet, but will. You leave one under a stone at Père Lachaise, folded and creased, the ink barely dry. Another you slide into the space between books at a left bank stall, pretending to browse as you slip it into place. A third you mail with no return address to an obscure magazine that publishes once a year and reaches readers who never say aloud that they are readers at all. It isn't about being published, it's about being found. You begin to feel watched, but not in the way that makes your skin prickle. It's softer than that, like a presence behind you in a room, not moving, not breathing, just aware. You find yourself writing more frequently, almost feverishly, as if you're racing a clock you cannot see. You aren't afraid, you're attuned. You've come to understand that the city listens, and when you speak its language, it speaks back. Your dreams change again. No longer confusing, they become choreographed. You walk through arcades and stone courtyards and quiet reading rooms, always greeted by someone just out of sight, someone who nods but never speaks. You write down these dreams in your waking hours, and the poems that emerge from them feel less like art and more like messages passed to you from the other side of the mirror. You receive your first reply, a small envelope left on your windowsill, tied to the stem of a dying rose. Inside, a single line, typed on a machine so old the ink bleeds slightly through the paper. Keep going. The veil is almost thin enough. You hold the note in your hand for a long time. You don't know who wrote it, but that's not the point. The voice is not familiar, but the intention is. It is a continuation, a tether across an invisible bridge. You think perhaps this is how Roland must have felt in the beginning. Before the killing, before the myth took shape. Just a man with a strange idea, alone with the city's shadows and the echo of his own footsteps. And now you are no longer following that echo. You are creating your own. You find a quiet rhythm in your new life. Days pass without needing a name. You wander aimlessly with purpose. Sometimes you sit for hours in the same cafe, not drinking, just watching, waiting for something unnameable. It always comes. A stranger leaving behind a book with a line underlined in pencil. A matchbox tucked into the corner of a window frame with coordinates drawn on its inside. A phone booth that rings just once before, falling silent again. Each detail a breadcrumb, each encounter a whisper. The line between observer and participant dissolves completely. You are both and neither. The stories you write no longer feel authored, they feel excavated, unearthed like ancient bones, polished smooth by years of quiet rain. And each time you leave one behind, folded in a public place or carved into the wet bark of a tree in a silent park, you feel the city acknowledge it. Not with fanfare, with stillness. You wonder sometimes if Roland still walks these streets, perhaps with a new name, a new coat, perhaps watching you from a shadowed seat at the back of the theater, nodding once before fading out again. Or perhaps he has vanished entirely, consumed by the very idea he created. You think you understand now how seductive that must have been, not the notoriety, but the dissolution, to become part of the city, part of the myth, part of something eternal and unknowable. You do not fear becoming lost, you fear becoming ordinary. And so, you keep writing. You leave behind your final message, that least fornouched into the spine of a library book no one checks out. A book about the architecture of forgotten cities. The message is simple. You are not alone. But you must walk alone to find us. And as you step out into the soft, dimming Paris evening, the fog curling around the corners of the old buildings like a shroud made of lullabies and old secrets. You know the story will go on. You were never here, and yet you are everywhere. And now, you close your eyes just a little heavier than before, not with fear, but with a gentle hum of mystery, still lingering in the back of your mind. You imagine the mist-soft streets of Paris as they quiet under the weight of midnight, the glow of old lamps casting halos onto wet cobblestones. Somewhere tucked behind a bookstall or folded between the pages of a forgotten novel, is a piece of a story you've just lived through, or dreamed, or maybe both. You feel your breathing slow. The edges of your thoughts begin to blur, the sharpness of detail fading like morning fog lifting from rooftops. The voices fade to the whispers, the riddles, the verses written in invisible ink. But they don't disappear. They curl into the corners of your mind like soft paper turning to ash without burning, leaving only warmth. What remains is not a name or a face or even a crime. It's a feeling, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a velvet coat you forgot you owned. The kind that suggests maybe not everything needs an answer. Maybe some stories are meant to stay unfinished, folded into the background of a city that knows how to keep secrets better than anyone. Let that comfort you now. Let the soft rhythm of the night take hold. Let the questions rest. Because for tonight, you're safe, you're warm, and the story, whatever it was, has gently come to its end.